Hanyang. Hello, I am the Dark Fae, and welcome back to Confessions of a First-Time Dungeon Master. So this is session 15. As always, if you missed the last session or just need a refresher, I will put a link to that right up here. So let's get started. Alright, so session 15, which is kind of the session I've been waiting for this final encounter kind of a deal. So our party, they start preparing as they usually do. They try to kind of see if they can find a guide or any resources to kind of head down south, as their instructions were intentionally rather vague, to just kind of head south and follow the dancing lights. Finding a guide, obviously, very smart idea. The thing with the swamp is that, like, no one has really ventured down that far, or like has really, I would say, would really have seen these dancing lights from the keepers. So I kind of just made up somebody on the spot, this like old ranger named Salis Ivy, who would venture deeper into the swamp, but I kind of gave him an injury that Umric offered to heal, but then kind of I tried to make it just so that like they wouldn't have someone to guide them the whole way, because I feel like that takes away a lot of this kind of the dangers and like the nature of the swamp, and also many people aren't willing to go like that far or are familiar with going down that far, so especially not alone. So he's kind of just a grizzled old man who wants to let nature take its course, but he agrees to take them south about 10 miles or so that it's just kind of before like the edge of the very, very deep swamp where things get like sludgy and places start getting submerged, places like that. So I forget how much I charged them. It might have been like 5 gold or something to take them down. So I think like Zahiri and Basil, they end up kind of taking a long rest. Kind of this is in the afternoon, so that they can kind of get their spells back and can better equip themselves for this journey. And so in the meantime, they find the guide and they end up heading into the swamp like pretty late at night, like almost like 10 or 11 p.m. I would say at night. So they head down south with the guide guiding them. They don't really run into too much trouble. Like there aren't that many swamp hazards. And then once at that kind of 10-mile mark, the guide bids them kind of a good journey and heads back to Flornessa. So now the party's kind of on their own. Now is when I kind of make them roll for swamp travel, but they roll really well with perception and kind of survival to keep an eye out for hazards. And so now they're kind of at this deep bog, this deep swamp area. In my head, kind of some of these bog areas, is more almost lake-like, so some of it's kind of like this dirty, murky, kind of like other places is just very deep swamp that can like suck you down beneath. So this is kind of where the dancing lights start. So by now it's about, after traveling all this way, it's about dawn. So some of them have exhaustion points because they've gone 24 hours without a long rest, so they take a rest there. And it ends up being about 8 hours. So it ends up being about kind of smack dab in the morning, I think, when they awake. So they take a rest, and while they're resting, during the watch, not a whole lot happens. And this scene might seem like well, I am not very good at like doing random encounters and like determining when they actually happen because I don't really trust my dice rolls sometimes, but there is a reason actually that they are kind of so safe on this journey is because the Marsh Keepers, whom the party has like encountered once, they are aware of their presence of the party in Fornessa, and they are interested in like why they're there and what they want, and so they are kind of granting the party safe passage through the forest and like kind of allowing them to come and visit, because otherwise without them there are many more sort of hazards and potential encounters that they would have to deal with. For example, there are like creatures that are guarding the entrance to these sisters' home. So, but because they're kind of unofficially like invited, then they don't encounter them. But anyways, so during the watch, Valkyrie spies a light, like a dancing light, just a glowing little orb. I think I said that this one was like a light yellowish green color, kind of like 200 feet away from where they were going south. And so once everyone wakes up, they decide to follow them. And this is kind of the funny part, because I didn't really mean to turn this into like a puzzle or anything like that, but I gave them like 2 more lights. It's like as soon as the party kind of approaches the light, like they float about 10-15 feet up, and so once they get within like 10 to 5 feet below it, the light will wink out, and then the next one will wink into existence. And I changed colors because 3 sisters, 3 colors. One of them is like yellow-green, one of them is red, and one of them is kind of blue. So I kind of was alternating those 3 colors, so like yellow-green, and then I changed it to blue, and then to pink, and then to green, and then to dark blue, and then to red, kind of. So I was doing that, and then very suspicious about these lights is can be expected, and they're like, oh no, this is another melody puzzle. I'm like, it's not. And they're like, no, we're gonna solve this. Okay, you asked for a puzzle, I guess I'll give you a puzzle. So we kind of just like made up something on the spot, kind of having them follow this colored trail of lights, and then sometimes 2 lights would appear, and then sometimes like lights of different colors would appear. Like one would be yellow and one would be green, and then have to figure out which one to follow. Yellow kind of was indicative of will-o-wisps, which are monsters in the monster manual, these undead little orbs that kind of try to lure travelers into like the deep parts of the swamp, and so that was that. So they did follow a yellow path. Luckily, our cleric, he cast water walking, which is amazing in a deep swamp where things are trying to lead you to your demise by drowning you and having you sink into a bog. So with that, they kind of didn't have to worry about any of the sinking hazards, and like you don't really need to navigate at that point because everything is kind of just flat and there's no chance of falling into a part of the swamp or getting stuck or anything like that. So that made it really easy for them. We'll see if they decide to do that on the way back, because there's definitely things on the way back that could now attack them. So they eventually make it through this after following the yellow path and almost falling, like getting stuck kind of, they head back and then follow the colored lights again, and then finally they reach like the tree, which is like the end area in my head, which is this large tree kind of on the edge of a almost lake-like area of the swamp. And so the tree speaks to them actually, and it kind of asks like who they are and what their business is. And they explain that I think they actually said that, we're the 4th sister and we're here to speak to the Marsh Keepers about like like the protection and that all of that of the swamp. So the tree then gives them the rhyme to allow them to enter, which is let's see if I can remember it off the top of my head. It's like, ere the sound of silver bells will take you where the sisters dwell. But words of caution low, take heed, stray too far and thou shalt bleed. And so once they ring that silver bell, kind of from the depths of this lake, like a dark shape starts to emerge, and a boat kind of just like floats up out of its depths and kind of washes up on the shore. So they all get in, and they're like, oh, but water walking, wouldn't that like mess it up and cause us to not be able to submerge? But magic. So this is not like, it's not like real water. It's like almost like, I don't know how to explain. It's like half illusion and like half real. So they can kind of see like the murky water, they can see things swimming in it, they can like kind of feel it against their skin, but they can breathe normally, and this boat just kind of submerges and just like kind of floats along, and just kind of keeps going. And like down here, it's almost interdimensional kind of, and so they kind of lose track a little bit of like time and like sense of space, and so eventually the boat washes up on another kind of grassy shore, and then they are in the lair of the marsh keepers. And so I kind of explain it as there's this kind of gray-green mist that kind of pervades the area, almost forms like walls around them, and so there's just this little kind of small path that opens up into a small, like a slightly larger kind of a cavern or room, almost like a throne room. And so there's like a raised little platform with like 3 thrones that are woven out of branches, and upon those 3 thrones are Zerlena, Emain, and Seisha, the 3 marsh keepers. So I think I mentioned this before. Zerlena, she has kind of the long red hair and is wearing like a green cloak. They all have very kind of decorative outfits, a lot of like leaves and branches and kind of vine like iconography. Emain, she's the one with like the blonde curly hair and the red cloak that's shaped like a maple leaf, and she's kind of the one who is in charge of like the animals. And then Seisha, with her like short dark hair and like a cloak of feathers that's like kind of blue tinted. She's kind of the odd child. She goes, I think I explained to the players before that she like goes around and like keeps balance between like life and death, which is a little creepy kind of, but it's kind of, and like very vague in what it actually means, but that's what she does. And Zerlena is the like leader of the 3. So they'll go in, and my players like throughout this kind of encounter, they were like, I don't want to attack them. Like I don't think we can kill them. And it's like, oh boy, we'll see how this goes. So this is another example that turned out of kind of what I said in the last session with like not having my players roll persuasion, but then also not feeling that like what they're saying makes sense to actually persuade them. So that's probably my fault in actually asking them to roll, or maybe like roll a bit too preemptively, because then what they follow up with might not actually persuade them. So I do feel kind of bad that I asked for the rolls and then they rolled decently. They rolled 18s, but I feel like I didn't really give them that. But there's also another reason to why they wouldn't be convinced from their argument alone. Because I think for me, what the players like say and do, like their role play and their like content, to me matters more than the dice roll, if that makes sense. So if they say something that wouldn't convince them in the first place. I don't feel like the persuasion roll, or like maybe I shouldn't give them a persuasion roll then, because it wouldn't make sense, or give them a disadvantage or something. But I'll explain what I mean now. And it's based off of kind of the sisters' like true nature, which they don't know and didn't really try to check for. So that was, I don't know. Anyways, so basically over the course of their conversation, kind of with Valkyrie and Umric a little, Tyrell a little, Basil a little, they all were basically trying to convince the sisters to, or no, they were first like mentioned all like the goings on in the swamp with like the Kotoblapas and like the weird mushrooms, and basically the sisters eventually sort of admit that they are behind it, in saying that their main goal is that they want to return Ixaliad, which is the country that the Siskorian Keep is in. They want to return Ixaliad and the Siskorian Keep back to like its original state of back to its like natural state, sort of before the keep was built and back when like nature could run wild through that country. And they mentioned it's because like their ancestors basically were driven from their homes to build this keep for like the wars of men, basically. And now like all of that has gone to waste, and it's just now a field for the dead because of all the graves that surround the Siskorian Keep. And so they kind of want their vengeance, and they want, in their way of returning the keep back to the wild, basically, is through this poison and these mushrooms, though they don't really admit that part directly. And they say also that this is kind of the will of Melisma, who is the goddess of wild nature, and that they're trying to right a balance that was unbalanced a long time ago. So they kind of appeal to like Valkyrie's sense of like home and also worship of Melisma, as well as Tyrell's. So Valkyrie mostly was trying to convince them that like this kind of vengeance and like bloodshed was unnecessary, and that they could like find a better way, basically. Like she kind of tried to appeal to like their better nature, like to not oust these people from their homes, and to kind of maybe only take back like the graves that surround the keep instead of like the entire city itself, which makes sense. But the problem is that they don't really know, as the Marshkeepers, they don't have a better like they don't have like that sense of mercy and like of a better self, because of what they are that they don't know. So maybe I didn't give enough hints as to what they are, but at the same time, like that's the whole point kind of them having a hidden identity. But I had her roll persuasion, and I think I shouldn't have, because they're not really offering anything in return or exchange. They're just saying, like, what if we did this instead with more peaceful terms? And the sisters are not really about peace, so they kind of give the argument that we can take what we want now, so why should what are you offering us that would cause us to change our minds or broker peace instead? So kind of started to reach an impasse a little bit, where the players couldn't really figure out what to say to convince them, and the sisters aren't budging. And so I kind of introduced a little bit of a tie-in to some of their backstories. So with Tyrell, he kind of before he arrived in the keep, he was looking for a certain sword with his with his covenant. There's covenants in this world. And so they kind of offer him more information about that, but he denies it he refuses it because he doesn't want to like sacrifice people in order to gain something for himself. Same with Valkyrie and kind of the cure for her home. And so then finally the sisters, they turn to Basil, and because he has a ring of mind shielding that's kind of fused to his finger that he can't get off, and he suspects is cursed. And so then they offer to take the ring off for him or he kind of offers that. He's like, if you can take this ring off, I'll do anything. And they're like, that piques their interest because A, it's a magical item, and B, they can kind of sense a way to get what they want. So they kind of strike a deal that if Basil brings them the leader of the Siskorian keep, the Viscount, then they will take the ring off. So based off of their nature and like their identity, they are lying. I don't know if my players suspect this. They didn't roll insight. I don't know what they expect, and I also like don't know what they're planning now. If they're actually going to bring the Viscount. They mentioned also that like Ferney might be interested in getting rid of the Viscount and like taking over the city. So there's just a lot now that could happen. So that's their agreement, and with that they kind of are ushered to leave. They end up kind of, I think it's like nighttime, I think they end up taking a long rest at that tree kind of, and before finding their way back, and so that's kind of where we ended it. But like now I don't know. Oh no, they sent a message to Ferney saying that they had found these like marsh keepers who were responsible for the poison and that they could be back in 3 days. Ferney herself has like kind of just returned to the keep as well, so she's also kind of catching up on all that business, and there's a lot going on that I've done a very bad job of keeping track of. So she basically says, all right, see you in 3 days and we'll figure something out. They are right in thinking that she's not very opposed and just like letting the Viscount go, but there's a lot of politics now involved, and I'm not very good with managing politics. So that's where we ended, and now for like the next session, I don't have a lot of time to prep, and I have to like keep track of like what has happened to Mistcore during their time, what's going on with like Ferney's whole quest and like war and all that, and then also have to see what my players are going to do either in the city or with in Ristamore, because like Havian is still missing and he might be dead by the time they return, so that's sad for Chari. I don't know. There's just a lot happening in the next one, but that'll be the next one and I'll have to prep for it. So this was a very interesting like final encounter, because now it's not really the final encounter, and I'm wondering if I should turn this like add on a little bit more to this to make this like more of an tie into more of like an overarching kind of a storyline, which is possible. There's a lot to do in the swamp. I'm surprised honestly that they spent this long in like one location, but like I've been giving them like a lot to do, I guess. So anyways, that was session 15. I still feel like they'll end up in combat with these things at some point, because they're fucking evil. Anyways, alright, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment down below if you've ever had a session where you just like avoided combat completely. But yeah, I hope you a lot. I hope you're enjoying following along with my campaign, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!